So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Some of you have already seen me. For those of you who have been here since this morning, so you have seen me. My name is Iqbal. I'm the founder of Agento AI. I'm also the founder of Data Science Dojo, but I mean Agento AI is a new thing that I'm doing. So in this panel, we are going to focus on MCP, which is really central to what we call context engineering. And MCP is being positioned as a powerful way to simplify context engineering for agentic AI applications. And I like that analogy of the USB-C of all the data sources for LLM applications. So making it easy to connect, really more standardize your data sharing with in a manner that is very similar to the REST APIs. So you standardize, all the AI agent connections to tools, data sources, and workflows. But as we start adopting MCP tools, there are actually concerns around governance and security, and primarily around is there a chance that these MCP servers and tools, they will become new vectors for security risks? What will be the governance practices? And we have built the platform that we are building. I mean, one of the things that actually is a concern is where we are concerned about the role-based access to any MCP calls. And how do organizations actually balance the speed of innovation with the guardrails and required compliance and safety first? So I will go ahead and welcome all of you. I will go ahead and ask you all to go around and introduce yourselves, and we'll take it from there. Alex, you want to go first?
Hey, I'm Alex Salazar. I am the co-founder CEO of Arcade.dev, and we are an MCP execution and authorization platform, meaning that we have a number of MCP servers and toolkits for use out of the box, like Google and Slack, etc. We can execute custom MCP servers, but more importantly, we can handle what's called agent authorization. Can this agent on behalf of this user perform this action on this resource? And that's one of the big problems in MCP today. So, and most of my team is former Okta, including myself.
Thank you, Alex. Mark, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Nice to meet all of you. My name is Mark Cavage. I'm president of Docker. My background personally is building developer platforms for, I don't know, 25, 30 years. I guess I'm old at this point. I was early at AWS. I ran Java for a while. I ran most of Stripe. I've done a lot of stuff. But I'm super excited about where Docker is going. We're super invested in developer productivity, security, and AI. And across all those, AI and MCP kind of sit at the intersection. And what I'll say is, we're in the nice position of Docker being such a widely used and ubiquitous platform. I get the privilege to talk to a ton of customers and users. And what I'll say is, at this point, I feel like there's at best 1% of the population that is not thinking about how to adopt MCP. And that's an equal amount of both excitement and euphoria, and also confusion and kind of like, oh my God, I'm scared, for all the reasons kind of previously talked about. So it's really excited to talk to you guys all today and be here and talk about that.
Thank you, Mark. Reena?
Hey, thanks, Raja. I lead engineering for ecosystem and marketplace at Atlassian. I'm similar to you, Mark, very passionate about platform and tool sets and enable all builders across, multiple different, geographies, as well as different industries to enable them to use the Atlassian products. And, essentially my teams build platforms that others can extend and build on top of Atlassian. So we have a Forge platform to build applications, and now the Atlassian MCP, as well as, of course, more directly APIs as well. So this helps the builders and each of the enterprises then customize the Atlassian instance that they have to actually serve more and more purposes beyond what we built out of the box. So I'm super passionate about this space, and really looking forward to this conversation today about how we think about MCP across the industry.
Thank you so much, Reena, and thanks everyone for the introductions. So let's dive right in. So I'm an educator at heart, right? So I'm an engineer, but also an educator. So first thing that I would like to do is, so we have a diverse audience. Would any of you like to describe MCP for anyone who has been in technology, but they don't know agentic AI? So what is MCP and why does it matter?
Nobody's going to jump. I can jump.
Just any of you. It's
Sure. Yeah.
catch up.
I'll start and then yeah, Alex and Reena jump in. The way, I mean, Raj, you kind of said this at the beginning, MCP is just sort of this universal description of how to present your systems and your data and your services to an LLM. And, you know, an LLM doesn't actually make calls for you. It tells you what it wants to go call. So something has to describe what those things are. So for example, if you have, you know, a Postgres database or a Grafana interface or a Jira catalog or whatever, you know, you can in the old days, you would basically have to describe that all manually to the LM of here's this thing that you can call me back for and get access to. MCP is a standardized way of doing that and gives you these building blocks for both how to connect to it and sort of a standard for how to go present that information. So you can, you know, the metaphor that always goes around is the USB socket or USB-C socket for LLMs, but think of it as effectively just a standard way of describing some system that you want to get the LLM to understand and be able to interrogate and act on.
Yeah, that's a great definition. I'll build on that. If you look at how an agent's built, there's a few tiers that every agent has. You have the large language model acting as the brain, coordinating how the workflow is being executed. You have some semblance of an orchestration system that's building some predetermined set of workflows or rough approximations of workflows around that large language model. And then all of those workflows ultimately tend to terminate at a tool call. This is where the agent takes an action, and that can be retrieval, it can be a manipulation, it can be anything. When the agent goes to take an action, the protocol between the agent and the action increasingly is becoming MCP. Now, I think where people are getting really tripped up with MCP in true agent building is they're using them like APIs. And I think that's why so many agents are having a hard time. MCP, like APIs are a service contract. They are describing how your service works so that another service can interact with it. That's not a really good use of MCP. APIs are actually great for that. MCP is best used when it's actually the inverse. It is kind of like the service contract for the agent of what it's trying to do. And so, you know, having like a MongoDB or a Jira MCP service, it's valuable for sure, but the agent almost never actually cares about the downstream service. It really cares about the action it's trying to take. And I'll give you a really, really mundane example. Let's say that I'm building a sales agent and it's going to help me brief, you know, my rep before they walk into an account. You know, so I have a one pager and the right brochures and the right talking points, all that fun stuff. It's going to hit the CRM. It's going to hit Google Drive for brochures. It's going to check email for past communication. So let's say we have a Google Drive tool, Google Drive toolkit, Google Drive MCP. Let's assume Google was all in on MCP. My agent, if I was using the direct Google Drive MCP server, would need to know how to traverse the Google Drive, you know, file structure to go find the right brochures. To do that right, I need to stuff context into the agent to explain to it how to find the right brochures by using Drive. The better way to do it is to build a brochure MCP server, because that's what the agent's attempting to do. And then that thing can talk to a Google Drive MCP server if it wants to. Truth is, it's probably better off talking to the Google APIs, because that's really the thing that's trying to be achieved. MCP or tools in general are intent-based workflows, not service-based contracts.
Yeah, thank you, Alex and Mark. Right, so I love the way you described it. So basically, what you're saying is that the responsibility for describing the contract is on the publisher side, whoever publishes the MCP server, and then the caller is, because I just I just call in natural language, and on the other side, it is the job of the MCP server publisher to actually standardize how.
Well, I would say the way around, right? Like, hot take. I think the reason why, so many of the services are releasing MCP servers and they're getting adoption is because the first wave of MCP adoption is Cursor and Warp, right? It is general engineering services. And so when the user is trying to communicate about what they want to do in a prompt, when they want to interact with Jira or Linear or Docker or MongoDB, they are stating intentions that are almost tightly one-to-one mapped to what those services do. I'll give you an example. Like I actually have just as much success, if not more, using the AWS or the GitHub command line tool in my agent than I do the actual MCP server, because the intent is mapped almost one-to-one. But if you look at the agents that are being built in the enterprise or in production, they have nothing to do with the downstream services, right? Like they're trying to achieve a higher order business goal, and the downstream services are really implementation details. And so like an MCP server in practice, in production, is just tightly coupled to the agent's intent. And so what we've been seeing is that they do best when they're written by the application developer, not the downstream service provider.
I would plus one that I think the best uses that we're finding as well is when we're describing in the MCP server tools as how we would want that agentic application to use it. And, really inside the MCP server, the most critical part is the tools that we're exposing, and then how we are actually describing the intent of those tools. And the tools are not a one-to-one mapping with the APIs. They will use APIs underlying it, but oftentimes it's a combination of multiple APIs that bring it together.
And Mark, you wanted to add something?
I'll just double down on what Alex and Reena both said. Alex said that, and Reena just said at the end, that really this point of the MCPs being effectively like de facto today is, I have a REST API and I slapped an MCP on top of it. That is a starting point, but to Alex's point, it only kind of works. And actually, the way I give a lot of people advice, it's incredibly easy to write a basic MCP server that does that. It's actually incredibly hard to write one that's good, that actually expresses intent and actually solves goals that are built for an LLM. Like there's a big difference between REST APIs for curl and what the LLM actually needs. And I think that gap is something everybody's kind of trying to still figure out as we speak. So
yeah. And that gap is measured very objectively and quantifiably. It is about token minimization, error rate minimization, and latency minimization. And so if you give an agent a generic MCP server, like the hardest example, the one that most people fail on, is like a database MCP server, right? If you give your agent like a MongoDB MCP server and you interact directly with it, you're going to have a very hard time. You're going to have to stuff it with so much context. You're going to have to do so many turns on it to get what you want, that you're ultimately going to consume a ton of tokens. You're going to have really high latency. And as a result of both of those, you're going to have high error rates. And that's nothing to do with MongoDB. They did a great job with their MCP server. I think it's a fantastic implementation. It's just you're using the wrong tool for the wrong job. What the developer should be doing is they should be building an MCP server themselves that represents the kinds of activity or intentions that the agent wants to perform that just happen to consume MongoDB. And when you do that, it's a one shot. It's like, hey, pull up users. There's no checking the database to see what does your table even look like. The MCP server already encapsulates like what it means to look up a user. So it's one call. You don't need very much context at all. And as a result, it's cheaper, faster, and lower error rate.
Okay. And Alex, I'm glad you pointed this out, right? So some of the MCP servers that I've used, I don't want to name names here, right? So in many cases, right? So my intent is missed, right? So what I'm trying to do, it really doesn't get done, right? So does this actually make you, so if it is more of a descriptive or generative task, that's a different story. But if it is more an action that I have to take, right? So any misfired action based on a wrong understanding or interpretation of my intent, it can actually expose the organization to all sorts of problems. So my next question, actually, the follow-up question is going to be, so what are the most pressing security and governance risks when deploying MCP, right? So the so-called RBAC or role-based access control, right? So when you deploy an MCP server, is it going to be the system user that is going to be deploying it, or is it going to be individual? When I use it, is it my application that is using that MCP server, or am I using it as Raja, right? So and going and using that MCP server. So my question for you, perhaps Mark, maybe I can start with you here. What are the most pressing security risks when deploying MCPs? Because you're doing a lot of work in that space. So let's start with Mark, right? And how do these differ from a traditional API or plugin integration?
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to get to that. I do want to hit on a point or build on something Alex just said, though, on this, because I don't know about Reena and Alex, if you guys have this experience. I talked to a lot of people about MCP, and like the thing that comes up is like, oh, what are we talking about? It'll all be MCP remotes and it's all fine. And the thing I keep telling people is literally what Alex just said, and why we're so invested in Docker on these containers being the right platform from this. So you can change where you deploy it. I deeply believe everybody's got to get their head around the thing Alex said of you, the application developer, have to go write an MCP server that can itself build on somebody. You can go build on the Mongo, you can build on the Stripe, you can build on the Twilio. That'll all be useful. But so much of these things are actually about business goals, and the business goal is fundamentally about that organization and their setup. That I think most people, you're not going to actually get what you want with most off-the-shelf things. You're going to have to go build a lot of these yourselves and actually put the thought and logic into that. So that's, anyway, just as an assertion, this is why, like, I'll put the one shameless plug of
Mark, Mark, you're referring to this as a consumer on a consumer or as a publisher of MCP server, right? So as a consumer, I have to add.
Honestly, I think either. So there's the people building MCP servers that want to, let's call them an independent software value arena, and you're an ISV, you need to have a MCP server out for your stack or your Docker or whatever else. And then, but as a consumer, if you posit that everybody is writing agents in the year 2025, or if everybody's at least thinking about writing agents, and in 2026 they're definitely writing agents. If you're doing that, you basically have to both consume MCP and produce MCPs yourself. And so there's not really a difference, in my opinion. And in which case, this really requires you to then effectively go back to, okay, what does it take to build and package software? Because that's all it is. And how to go share that with somebody else. And you have all the same problems that you've always had around, okay, where's the credentials? Where does it run? How do I get it there? How do I share to somebody else? How do I version it? How to revoke it? Like all that stuff. And so that's, just, we at Docker have been putting a very emphatic voice out to the industry that OCI, Open Container Initiative, is the right way to go do that and package the ones that you yourself build, regardless of what you're consuming. But anyways, that's my plug on the before I get into the security panel in a second. Alex, you're going to jump in. So
no, I actually, that's a great lead into a security conference.
Yes.
To your own security answer about Tell, but I would say that we actually agree with you. We all of our toolkits are containerized with Docker, because I don't know how else you would do it.
Right.
It's madness without it. But anyways, Mike, back to you. I think you're answering the security question.
Yeah. It's like, so that mostly it was a good build and a good thing for people to understand that you're going to be writing them yourself, whether you're going to use them or not. You're going to write them yourself. Okay, so in terms of like what are the problems and what's different, I'll give you some kind of hot takes, snarky takes, and then some actual substantive things. Hot take, I think right now, like nobody knows what's going on. You do talk to any company and effectively I get the following story of like, what are you doing with AI? I'm all in on Copilot. We love the Copilot. Oh, but then the developers found Cursor, and then, oh my God, I don't know. Then it connected to the Cursor, to the Jira, to the ServiceNow, and like, it's madness, and I don't know what's going on. That's effectively every company that I speak to. And I think what that means then really is at the most basic level, before we get to all the fancy things of MCP, it's actually to start with like basic observability, auditing, and kill switches. Like that's the things I think people are fundamentally struggling with right now, because you've got very much the decentralized adoption of the coding agents, a la Claude Code, et cetera, and a very much decentralized and democratized kind of organizational push and thesis that we don't want to miss out. We want everybody using all the AI they can. We'll figure out how to, control costs and control things later. But right now, I think just basics on inside most organizations, they're really struggling with just even getting to that, number one. But then in terms of the actual problems, then beyond the baseline, whatever, you can go, it'll take you 30 seconds to ask ChatGPT or Google for a long list, and it'll tell you about 100 different problems. But if I were to pick just a couple of them, prompt injection, I think, is the one, and tool poisoning are the big ones that, everybody thinks about. But because it's so easy to say, but it's also so easy for it to actually happen. Like there's we at Docker published these horror story blogs. They're worth reading if you haven't, but one of them is about actually the GitHub injection. It's like, cool, this is actually like, you could almost imagine, even if it weren't like the truly most malicious attacker that was like poisoning GitHub issues with like prompt injections, you could almost imagine the LM getting tricked, and even with innocuous things. So one is that. I think the identity and secrets management is like, I don't know how else to put it, but it's a total pain in the ass. And so that's, I think, just a, kind of a really hard thing for people to get their head around, in particular around where they run and, like, again, who you share it to. And there's just so much of this divide between what's a system agent, what's an agent acting on my Mark's behalf or my Roger's behalf or so on, versus what's one for the team. Like, it's hard. I think, basically people in practice, like we're kind of building on this story of, well, people connect the cursor to all their systems, and all the tools are just super promiscuous and over permissive. And I don't know, everybody I know just hits the YOLO button of like, okay, I'm tired of hitting the allow button. I'll hit the allow every time, like just make it all go away. In which case, it becomes very easy for these things to start getting chained in ways that you don't understand, and because you don't have observability, it makes it that much worse. And then, of course, you have all the other supply chain risks of people, injecting a bad tool and so on. And then you kind of asked the very last thing, and I'll turn over to Reena and Alex to build on. You asked, like, what's different about this than just APIs and so on as part of the question. And Alex kind of said this at the very beginning, like there's this huge shift of you're not writing code anymore and you're not making decisions. The LLM is the decision maker, which means you get very non-deterministic results every time it runs. You use a tool, which makes it very hard to have trustable guardrails. And so, that coupled with the, like, how just the mere nature of how low friction it is to connect these things just makes, massive amounts of blast radius. So, that's, as I keep saying, it's incredibly easy to write a basic MCP server, in particular one that does reads. And even then you'll still have injections and risks and data leakage. And it's incredibly hard to write something that is both useful and safe. So that's my take on what I see a lot of.
Yeah. Can I build on that?
Go, Alex, if
Yeah,
I can, then I'll let you jump in. So yeah, I think great context on that one, Mark. I think what kind of, being on the builder side here, and where we are kind of, really custodians of enterprise data and protectors of it, we do kind of, take all of those very seriously from our perspective. So I think it, all of your points actually just don't go away. So I think kind of, as we're moving from like, humans making decisions to LLM making decisions, like you said, the controls kind of stay the same. In fact, they just get enhanced, is how we think about it, right? And how I think about it also is that, giving admins still the controls about what MCPs they allow inside their system to then connect to Cursor or Copilot or whatever that new agent may be, is very, very critical. And it in fact becomes even more kind of required now to say, okay, what are the tools that those kind of agents are actually, or those MCP servers are actually building and providing to my users? How much access do they have? And really kind of, the question that Raja was asking is like, do the granularity of it at the system level or the RBAC or the user level go away? It's like, no, they stay the same. I think those kind of, just manifest into different personas and different kind of entities right now. So I think as a MCP server builder, we not just have to worry about, what our server is doing, but also what is the client we're enabling on the other side? Well, who's the host and what are their security practices and requirements, and possibly going to protect ourselves from other MCP servers that they are also going to be enabling in the same context, because that is where the leakage of the data and other kind of, proliferations could happen as well. So there is a kind of, I think the security pieces just get more and more heightened, exactly what you're saying here, Mark, too. And I think the onus on the data governance, both from the admins as well as the builders of software like us, kind of, just goes up even more.
So if I bring it down a level, right now, no one can write an MCP server. that is not a service account unless you are the vendor. And so everything we just talked about, I'm building an agent. I want to talk to, I want to talk to Jira as an example, or I want to talk to Google. I can't write that MCP server and do anything other than give it a service account, because the spec does not support delegated authorization. And so there is no way for today for an agent to act on as an agent on my behalf in a scoped, privileged way to any downstream service. The spec doesn't support it. Now, we as Arcade, we contributed this an RFC to the spec. It was recently accepted to go enable this, to go enable delegated authorization, so that ChatGPT can send an email, because it's almost 2026 and you still can send an email from ChatGPT for this reason. If you want to build an agent that sends email, you can as a user. The reason there aren't personal assistant agents is because they can't access your calendar. And so that is the biggest problem in MCP right now, in my opinion, and in agent development. You can't have an agent act on your behalf unless you give it a service account. And service accounts are a non-starter in the enterprise, because it creates what's called an authorization bypass vulnerability. And so if I give a service account, any level of access in a system like Jira or Google or SAP or whatever, and it's anything other than the lowest common denominator of the user, and then the intern gets access to the agent, the intern just escalated their privileges. And so this is why when we talk to organizations that are trying to put agents in production, which surprisingly are a lot of the Fortune 500 and 1000, they're having to kill their agent projects because they can't pass security review, because they can't handle scoped access on behalf of the user.
So I'll jump on one thing there. So I agree on all that. The one caveat that I will say that I'm seeing now, which has been surprising to me, but I see this because we're the desktop people. We have Docker Desktop. We're seeing a bunch of agents actually get built that are effectively not being deployed to something like a backend, which limits, things like Slack connectivity and so on.
Yeah.
But for I want to make my Claude send an email. Like effectively, this is what people are using with Docker Desktop for, is because I can get Mark's OAuth token injected into Docker's MCP gateway on the desktop, and then actually funny enough, the way I term this is I'm basically seeing the desktop become the new production endpoint, because A, the coding agent runs there, and B, well, you can actually solve a bunch of these problems because you already have them effectively with either one password of the keychain, or you can at least get configuration of OAuth injected manually. And so funny, that's all true, except for this one thing of all of a sudden I'm seeing desktop usage like spike for that exact purpose.
Yeah, actually, I'll comment on that. So we've been seeing that too, but it is a bit of an illusion, largely, and I'm not surprised that you guys at Docker are seeing it, because the illusion is largely that the early adopters of MCP and MCP Desktop with standard IO, with a standard IO interface, are developers and DevOps people, right? And so they're very comfortable, running and installing these things on their machines, and the types of things that they're talking to lend themselves to these interactions. One of the big problems, though, even with that model, is that in those scenarios, that MCP server, it assumes the identity of the user. It's
100%.
Not acting on behalf of the user. It is the user. And that's not a security problem. It's a safety problem.
Yep.
And so I've seen Cursor try and delete my root directory accidentally. Now, thankfully, it doesn't have sudo access. And so when it tried, it failed. And it was very kind. It apologized profusely. But when the agents act when they act as you and they assume your roles and your credentials without having like a delegated authorization model, then they can delete emails. They can delete they can delete folders. Like there's no way, other than how you construct the MCP server, there's no way to scope what the agent can do separate from the user. And so the right way to do it is basically OAuth. You have an application that's registered that has its own scopes and claims as your agent. And so you can say, hey, agent, you can't delete email, but you can read them. And then you have the user's identity and their permissions, which is I can only read and access my email. And then the intersection of the two gives you security and safety. But it's early innings. Like this is what we do as a business, help people with that. But the spec is catching up. And so it's a problem right now. We're all bullish that it's going to be much easier in about 6 months or earlier, but it's one of the biggest problems right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Alex, speaking of, Cursor apologizing profusely, if it had deleted it, it would have apologized more profusely, actually. I mean, I've read those horror stories. I mean, they're just, but yeah, so let's actually use this as a segue, right? So on the building side of it. So Reena, I know that Atlassian has been working on MCP servers for their products. So what are some of the, in your opinion, as someone who's releasing this to your customer? I mean, you have a huge customer base, a lot of adoption. What are the potential implications of any lapses that came up in your product meetings? Say, hey, I mean, we don't want to do this. If we allow this action, this might happen. If we disallow, this is going to be a product. It's going to be a poor customer experience. So how do you can you walk us through and give us an idea what are some of the potential implications, and what is the thinking process behind when you're building these MCP servers?
Yeah, definitely, security is paramount for however we think about it. Before we develop a product, the first thing is like, okay, what's the security guardrails and constraints and, audit points and checkpoints that we're going to put in the system. So that's definitely been one of the key guiding principles for MCP and MCP, as we are just discussing. Is like so new that, we're still kind of getting around to understanding it fully. Of course, the OAuth 2.1 implementation is something that we've adopted completely, and that gives us the overlying, or I would say, the boundaries around the authentication piece that Alex was mentioning. So that's one that we kind of make sure that we are doing definitely to start with. What kind of continues to be a challenge is the pieces that we do want to kind of give access and control to the admins to do. So we want to give the admins much more of the controls. At the same time, while we are building our MCP servers in a way which is secure, give the admins controls for what they want to be enabling, which types of agents they want to be enabling to be using our MCP server itself as well, so that they can control their the egress of the enterprise data, which is really kind of their crown jewels, and the audit trails that they need to have, in addition to, say, the pseudo access type issues or something really nasty. If it did happen as well, do they even know kind of what happened, and do they have the ability to trace back? We definitely don't want any of those things to happen in the first place. So our approach really has been, let's start with being mindful of exposing the tools that we start with as well, so that we are kind of being super careful about what could be destructive actions that could be taken around the data itself, and making those much more constrained and restrained around that aspect as well. So this is really kind of our key tenets here, that we ensure that the security and data governance of our customers' data is something that we are controlling, and then of course we are giving the admins the tools and the granularity that they can then control, while also kind of really enjoying all of the benefits that they want to be, and we want them to also have through the new agentic AI workflows that they can enable.
So do you think a misconfigured MCP tool or MCP server, I mean, can in turn delete my entire Git repository that I've been working on in the last
Definitely
1
not.
year?
That's exactly why we don't expose tools that make those happen either. So that's kind of definitely the paramount piece, is like, what tools are we exposing in the first place, and that's up to us to control.
This is great, and thanks, Reena. So Mark, Docker is sitting at this. They have built this ecosystem, for other containerization, and now even for MCP, right? So you have an MCP image. It makes it actually quite convenient to go and get that MCP server deployed in no time. Actually, I love that as as an engineer. How do you vet this out? I mean, this is I don't even know how you vet this out, because how do you mitigate the supply chain and open source risks and abuse and misuse, or how do you vet out?
Yep, no, great. Well, one, I'm very glad you found it easy and you were happy with it. That's
I
actually
love it. Yeah.
yeah, I love it too. In terms of how do we vet it? This is the part where this is part of why I'm so excited for us at Docker to be doing this. Like, we can build on top of the shoulders and foundation of what we've been doing for the last 10 years. So ignoring MCP for a moment, Docker Hub is this vast ocean of things out there that you can go pull. And we billions of polls, a month come out of it. There is, however, a Docker official images curated section where we've been for the last decade working with open source and upstream on effectively every project that is the top 100, 200 or so that really matter to folks. And effectively, it kind of looks like a distro where we stamp and certify that the source and the maintenance of those packages is good, that there's not vulnerabilities, and we build it on our systems. So we've been doing that for a long time for base images, application images, framework images, etc. For the MCP catalog, of course, you can publish your own, but for the point of getting to curation of how do you actually know what you trust and what you vet and so on, effectively, we have this cheat code of, well, I could build on top of the exact processes we have, where we're already pretty good at working with open source and upstream. And so, yes, MCP requires a new cast of characters that didn't exist before to work in there, but effectively, we're able to use the same process and the same and this is not a thing I can tell you about where it's like, oh my God, we do all the amazing AI that just makes it all possible. At the end of the day, it's humans and us actually going through with a high degree of confidence and a high degree of vetting and trust that actually what's coming in is actually something we will stamp and we'll certify. And that's what makes it into our curated catalog. This is part of why, besides, really the goal from us is make it incredibly easy and low friction for a developer to connect to, Cursor or Claude Code or whatever, and work with MCPs and or build on top of them, but also make it safe and possible for you to work from out of the registry. So, it's an open registry. We try to have anybody and everybody come in that can work with us, and we, do all the vetting, like Atlassian is in there and Stripe's in there. And I don't remember if there's an Arcade Dev one off the top of my head, but, we'd love to have one. So.
Yeah, there's a lot actually. So we are we're using quite a lot of those actually in our on our end, and it makes it actually quite convenient. Alex, how are you guys actually helping this entire ecosystem, right? So if you can give us an idea.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we do is that we solve the auth problem. The agent auth problem. And so if you're trying to build an agent and you want the agent to interact with some of these secure systems, which is almost everything, Google, Jira, Slack, SAP, your own custom APIs, we make it very easy to build secure toolkits that the agent can communicate with and offload work to. And as part of that, we're very big believers in contributors to the MCP spec. We just contributed a lot of the way we do it to the spec. And as part of that, we ourselves also build out a lot of these toolkits. And so we have a large library of pre-built LLM optimized, LLM evaled tools for all the major services, including Jira. Jira just came out about a month ago. It's great, use it. To make it very easy for agent developers to just go turn this stuff on and build whatever it is they want. And then we have a really nice SDK so that a developer can very easily and very quickly build their own toolkits for what their agent needs that might consume other downstream services or just do something for their own services.
So should I expect role-based access coming up with the MCP?
Well, yes. So we already support role-based access right now. We support delegated authorizations. We support end user-based OAuth today. We just don't do it via MCP until the spec can support it. But we added that to the spec along with our partners at Anthropic and other companies. Now we're all just collectively waiting for that to get merged into the spec. And once that happens, all of our functionality around auth will also support MCP. In the short term, until that happens, we have toolkits that work without MCP and do all the same work.
Okay. I will present this not so hypothetical question, right? So as someone who's building products, and I'm someone who's adopting MCP servers and integrating them in my Agentic AI workflows. So let's say I'm the CIO of a company. How should I decide or evaluate an MCP product, and what should be my considerations when I bring in? Of course, I cannot go MCP server by MCP server, right? So what would be the best practices of bringing MCP in my organization? I know it's a tough one. I know that, right? So, because there are no books. I mean, we are still, it's very nascent. But I'm just curious. For instance, I mean, my first rule internally is it has to be the official MCP server from Docker, and that's the first starting point. So I took the easy one. What would be the recommendation beside this? How should a CIO evaluate?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the opposite position. Kind of back to my earlier point, like the official anything MCP server is not terribly valuable if you're building anything.
Of course, yeah. I agree.
And so I don't even know that would work. I would inverse the question and be like, what's the agent you're trying to build? And let's go make sure we get it's basic product management. Let's go figure out what the agent is. Let's go figure out how we're going to do it. And then if an MCP server is the right answer, let's use that. If if A to A or something else, or custom building is the right thing, then let's take that path. I don't yet believe MCP is. We're huge believers in MCP, and we think MCP will be like, the thing for everything, but it isn't that yet. And I think people jumping ahead to where MCP is going to be and expecting it to be that today is honestly the biggest headwind to MCP. Like, so much of the negative press is because people are expecting too much of a protocol that's not even a year old yet. And so, right tool for the right job.
I will say, well, agree. I mean, at the end of the day, I agree, and I'd even go further. I spent, even for our own organization, we have a lot of build versus buy conversations, because everybody is out pitching you. They're, every SaaS vendor is effectively telling you like, oh, I got an agent now, so you got to figure out, do I actually think this is going to be useful or not? But so you agree with Alex actually in terms of, at the end of the day, like it's just not that big of a protocol. It's only a year old. Like I'm old. I've never seen a protocol in my life go this fast from a blog post to like everybody on earth uses it, and we're having conferences and panels about it. It is, you are still going to connect. It's not everything Alex said is true. You are still going to need to find them to go connect to something, in which case, the easy button is, we'll start with Docker, start with the remotes, because at least you're getting a warranty on those, where they come from. And if not for that, then you're basically in kind of like, to Alex's point, in product management 101 and quality assurance 101 of, well, you're going to have to introspect it, understand what it does, understand how it breaks. Like, as I've been describing to people for 30 years and teaching interns and so on, like, if it magically works, it will magically break. And LLMs are magic. In which case they may magically break, and MCP may magically break. And so really it's on you, the organization, to understand what it is you're consuming and understand what the boundaries are for it. And then you can make an assessment. And there's not, we at Docker can give you the shortcut for getting them from at least an upstream place. At least, they're trustworthy and they're good, whether they solve your exact problem or not. And I loved Alex's framing in terms of errors, cost, and so on at the beginning, like in terms of your actual objective goals. But at least you can trust them. You still have to, you basically have to go through the same things you've always gone when you bring in any kind of a technology, whether it's MCP or just generic open source or a third-party vendor, which is, do I understand what it does? Am I going to get value from it? And do I trust it? And have I actually done some level of acceptance testing that it meets what I want as an organization?
That's great. Thanks, Mark. So there was this report that was in news from MIT that only 95% of investments in AI, they result in 95% actually result in zero ROI, and only 5% actually provide any meaningful business value. And I think one of the reasons, among many other things, I mean, it's far more complex than this. But one of the complexity in building these agentic AI systems is getting the right context at the right time and correctly, and lack of standardization, siloed data sources, and all of that. Right? Do you think that characterization, that assessment, is correct among many other things? And do we think that MCP is going to help in this case, or is it going to hurt, right? So maybe people are going to become more cautious and, hey, I mean, we don't want to deal with this, right? So Reena, you want to go ahead and maybe what's your take on this?
Definitely. So that was such a fascinating report. I was like really, first of all, I'm just very, very grateful for the insights that they provided, the depth of findings that they've gone into. And of course, like, I think I suspect, it's a little more stark than what probably the reality is, but it's good to have, I think, a little bit of kind of, cold water on all of the high expectations that we've had on AI for a bit. So coming to kind of, your question on what I think about kind of, where things are heading and how maybe in the context of this particular question or with this particular panel here as to how is MCP going to help with this space or not. I definitely think that, I'll go back to what Alex said, a huge plus one to that, which is that, first of all, I think what we haven't been able to do in the AI space really is understand what are those hero use cases, what are those, working backwards from the customer, the user of these, which is, the knowledge worker in most of these enterprises. What do they really kind of, want and care for, and where's the product market fit right now, like today, with the agentic systems that we can provide them. And this is where I think of course, the MCP can be a very rich set of tools that we can give to the agentic systems to then help solve those problems. And I think the fact that the MCP makes these much more kind of, discrete and easy to understand, more deterministic in their flows, solve some of the quality assurance, and of course provides a little bit more guardrails around security if we add them to the mix a little more. I do think that there are ways for us to be able to solve some more of the customer use cases problems and really kind of, getting into the reliability pieces, getting into the quality pieces, getting into the understanding of really where the user use cases are. So I think if we were to kind of, for our customers, do better with understanding their use cases and then being able to, bring the right tools for the right problems, we'll be able to get much faster into the adoption and the usage of these agentic systems. I think we are still kind of groping our ways around for various of these installations, unfortunately, today.
So Reena, so if I understood correctly, so it is basically not having well-defined use cases, and so we'll need a lot of very technical, talented product managers then who can just
Yeah, I think it's
find
a
out.
question of really marrying the use cases and where the users are at, bringing them along the journey and bringing the tools that match their kind of, use cases and their requirements. And really MCPs can help with that because we do kind of, then be able to provide them those specific tools, those specific kind of, understanding while leveraging all of the kind of, really great smarts from the agentic AI spaces of, understanding the inference and understanding the context, bringing the context along both in the user space as well as from multiple other sources to the same agent in the same session.
Thanks, Reena. Mark, Alex, do you want to add anything here?
Sure. I'm full of hot and snarky takes. So I'll basically, if you take the report on AI, like everything Reena said, like I agree with, by the way. But if you take that report from MIT, the 95% of people get zero value. If you just, I'll draw a comparison. If you just start with just developers, and I'll come back to the business view of all AI in a second. For my entire career, watch people try to measure developer productivity and largely, fail at it. Basically, where it's like, oh, we have all these metrics, we have the Dora, we have the space, we have all these things that we go do. And at the end of the day, it's incredibly hard and subjective to figure that out. And so it's like hard to figure out, have you actually moved the needle on developer productivity inside an organization from an ROI perspective of like, what are you brought in? And you kind of like, it's like, you subjectively know, like, oh, this was better, this was not. And I got some metrics that may or may not line up to that. But so from an AI, whether the right number is 95% or not, I don't know. But in that paper, what I particularly loved was the shadow. There's a call out about the shadow, effectively where it's succeeding is the shadow organizations that are basically the people that are off close to the actual problem, thinking hard about it, and then just kind of doing their own thing in the weeds. And they come back with something that actually solved the business problem. Because when you go to, do I find that number kind of believable? Like I do at the end of the day, because I think if we can't articulate very well what ROI is on a development organization, and everybody struggles with this, most businesses, I think, especially from a productivity is very hard to measure and manage. From an actual productivity measure of just any function, whether it's HR, sales, accounting, whatever it is, it's incredibly hard. And so you're just like pouring money into AI, hoping for some magic to come back. And it's really the cases where the people understand what the pain point is and what the value is that have actually solved it. And so my suspicion is it's better than 5%. But if you're looking at it from like a board level view, probably that actually number is pretty accurate to what I would imagine is actually happening. But the truth is somewhere in the middle.
And you can never make the board happy, right? So I mean, you have to keep doing more, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Alex, you want to add something?
Yeah, yeah. We're in the field all day with customers that are actively have staffed and budgeted agent building teams. And so from that perch, I don't know what the number is, but it's directionally correct. We see a lot of failed projects and killed projects, so I'll use that as the metric. It's actually it's a very finite set of reasons why these projects fail. It's the costs were just untenable because they were using the token weight. They were using just tokens too much. So the LLM costs were uneconomical for what they were trying to build. Latency was just similarly just unachievable. It was just too long for user time to wait that long. And then the third one was the accuracy rates weren't high enough. In a demo, you can get something really cool working, but if you can't get it above 80-something% consistency, no one will use it in production. You can release it, but no one will adopt it. And then there's a fourth, which is security kills it. So we see some combination of those happening to the majority of projects we see in the field. And MCP isn't part of the solution, frankly, not because it's bad. It's just a protocol, right? It's not like a white horse. The problem is multi-layered. Part of it is talent. Very few people know how to build agents today, and so they're running into a lot of basic problems. Nobody knows how to do evals, as an example. The second one is there are real security issues around authorization, around safety, et cetera. People are trying to figure out. And then, but I do think that MCP represents a body of work that is part of the solution, which is tool use. And but I'll remind the audience that MCP is a protocol for tool use. It is not itself tool use or tools.
Thanks, Alex. We are actually over time. I will take a look at, probably we can answer 2 questions from here. So I will just quickly scan through. So I'll take this one. Rolling out MCP org-wide, what's your no-brainer guardrail stack? And how do you keep dev speed up? So basically, I think the question is around what kind of guardrails you would put around MCP, and how do you keep up? How do you stay compliant?
I feel like this is a gimme for Alex and I, where it's like, well, the 2 things I would imagine you clearly want to roll out is Docker and arcade.dev. Both of them are actually solving a whole lot of MCP governance problems. But to some extent, that's kind of a serious answer. To some extent, there's not. I don't think this is anywhere near mature enough yet, where we can all look at it like, oh, it's like, I'm going to date myself here, but it's the equivalent of the lab stack, where we all agree that's the exact, right configuration of things. A lot of this is still, there's evals are this very basic, narrow thing for prompts, but then really you need overall observability of the whole platform. And we're just not there yet, frankly, in terms of something where everything end-to-end works across, supply chain and discovery, through building, through deployment, through it's just not there. And I think we're living in the world of, to the point of that paper, it's the shadow IT or the shadow organizations that are doing this, and they're kind of like Wild West putting together what they need from a bunch of different places because the space is just moving so fast. So that said, I think Docker and arcade.dev are both solving very meaningful problems for people, and we will help.
Yeah, but actually, I think you have the right panel for it, because as much as we can solve things like delegated authorization, we can only do what the downstream service, like an Atlassian, has exposed at its policy layer. And so if you're a SaaS vendor and want people to use you in your agentic flows in a secure fashion, or you yourself are trying to expose part of your own functionality for your own agents to consume, the policy layer, RBOC, ABOC, contextual access management, all of that stuff, it actually needs to live in those services that you want the agent to talk to. You do not want to create an intermediate layer for this stuff, because then you're going to end up with identity silos, and those don't work at all. That, you will create more problems than you'll solve. And so it's like the work that Atlassian's doing and Mongo's doing and other people are doing. It's having richer policies available to lock this stuff down, so services like Docker and Arcade can best enforce.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. We are way over time, so I will close with one last question. I will go around and all of you can answer this. What are you most excited about in the context of whatever you're building at Atlassian? Maybe Reena, you can go first, and Docker, and then Arcade.
Yeah, I think I'm just like specifically in the context of MCP servers, probably just most exciting for me is the collaborative agentic workflows that we can be building across, multiple different SaaS tools at this point. And how do we get our users to get so much more value outside of kind of, just the Atlassian boundaries so that they can then be using not just, Atlassian tool sets, but actually connecting all of their system of work that they have today, whether that be email, be Slack, be their Salesforce or other kind of, ways to manage their campaigns and create content and so on. So really kind of, how do we become more and more available to our builders and the knowledge workers so that they kind of, are able to leverage all of these agentic workflows that are coming across in a collaborative way and in a way that are totally secure and, follow much more of their kind of, where they want to take their lives and their systems.
Thank you, Reena. Mark?
I can go next. Yeah, it's sort of similar. We're at the end of the day, we're an app dev company. We're kind of a DevOps company. We help people build and package apps and get them to prod. And I think what I'm most excited about is doing for agents what we did for microservices. Right? I think really Docker basically made like the modern era of cloud native, ultimately by being container native possible, by helping people factor things down and then actually have flows around that. And at the end of the day, we have a lot of stuff we're doing around security and governance and management and deployment and all the rest for MCP. And fundamentally, what I think is most exciting is, as people get through this first wave of having a whole lot of agentic projects fail, we will get there. And I deeply believe everyone will figure out I have to spend a lot more time than I think I have to spend using something like what Reena builds, building it my own logic on top of that suits my business need, and then packaging that up as applications. And I think, we at Docker this is kind of what we do, is kind of our jam. So I'm excited about the new world as we evolve forward.
I'll go fast.
Alex?
I'm super excited because we've been talking about models for the last 2 years, and the models are now good enough. And the real problems, the real bottlenecks in agent development are now, what can the models actually do? What can the agents do with all of this intelligence? And the answer to that question is tool use, and that's what we're enabling along with MCP. And so I'm super excited to be helping to drive that stuff.
Okay. Thanks, Alex, Mark, and Reena. Thank you so much.
For having us.
I would love to continue the conversation, but we are approaching the next panel, right? So we are going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.